Welcome to Liner Notes. My name is David Bixler. AI, labor-saving tool or existential threat. On his new recording Server Farm, saxophonist and composer Jon Irabagon contemplates the potential threat and promise of this omnipresent technology. For this recording, Irabagon augments his regular quartet consisting of keyboardist Matt Mitchell, bassist Chris Lightcap, and percussionist Dan Weiss, with violinist and vocalist Mazz Smith, trumpeter Peter Evans, guitarist Miles Okazaki and Wendy Eisenberg, bassist Michael Formanek, and percussionist and electronic musician Levy Lorenzo. Imitating AI, Jon spent several years doing a deep dive into the musical output of his collaborators, mining their entire catalogues for ideas that create the foundation of the music on this exciting recording. Jon Irabagon, welcome to Liner Notes. Good morning. Thank you for meeting with us today. You have a great new recording out called Server Farm, and I'd like to delve into that and other things. So first, good to meet you, man, and congratulations on a really cool record. Nice concept and crazy sounds, and in the best way of the word.
Awesome.
So,
yeah, thanks for listening. Thanks for having me, and I'm a big fan of yours too. So this is great to meet you.
All right, cool. So, man, let's just jump right in with this. You know what? I think perhaps as musicians, we're concerned about our playing, like as we record, like, okay, we want to have like burning solos, and we're maybe go to like a compositional thing. And this is like truly conceptual. And, maybe unpack, what this is. You talk about the promise and threat of AI. And so how did that impact what you did on this recording?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I've done a bunch of records. I'm trying to do burning solos. I'm trying to write my best compositions that I can and get it documented with each record. For this particular record, I knew that I wanted to challenge myself texturally. So part of that was hiring 9 of my favorite musicians that are complete iconoclasts and then like instantly recognizable. And so I wanted to challenge myself compositionally, knowing that these 9 people were on board, wanting to push them to their limits, maybe get them to record stuff they haven't made before, or sounds or ideas they haven't put down on record before. So I wanted to lead them down a specific road compositionally, but I also wanted to leave it open enough that they didn't feel stifled by having to read 1,000 or 1,000,000 notes or something like that. So I definitely was like straddling the line between trying to get my exacting compositional ideas across, but then also giving these people the freedom that they've earned through their playing and their lifelong dedication to music, and let them express themselves. So that was like first and foremost in my mind as far as the compositions go. And then it took me a long time to get these compositions together and get the whole concept of the record together. And during that entire time, it was about how AI was taking over and the good possibilities and the goods that could come out of it, and the powerful synthesizing aspects of what it could be, but also humans gonna human, right? And having to think about what's going to happen with people with nefarious ideas and trying to monetize it and trying to maybe let it get a little out of hand from what we're actually able to deal with right now.
In a way, you actually, in your process, as I read, you kind of turned the tables on AI instead of asking, this electronic source to produce the material for you. You talk about having done a deep dive on each one of these players. And so my first question to you is each of the pieces an amalgamation of different ideas of the players, or are they like dedicated, this is the Miles Okazaki inspired composition?
So the process, I wasn't like feeling pressure to get this record out anytime quickly. I wanted to let the compositional process happen organically. And so with that kind of like ease of mind, I was thinking, well, how do I try to simulate what AI might do? If I fed all my ideas into an AI, what would it spit out? And the closest I could come, and required a lot of time on my end because AI is super powerful and I'm not that smart, was that AI would take all the recorded input that all these 10 musicians have made before and like like learn it and study it, or at least go through it. So for months, I tried to listen to the entire recorded history that I could find, and also some YouTube live concerts and everything, some bootlegs that I could find for all 9 of these musicians that I love so much. It was a great, I mean, for me, that was actually one of my favorite parts of the whole process was months of intense listening to these people that I loved, their compositions and their improvisations. So that was really fun. So then once that happened, I took some notes and I jotted down some ideas during those months. But when that period was done, it was really more about me composing with those minimal notes, but then with the idea and that whole aura and vibe from months of listening in my head. So there are some direct ideas, but the compositions are mine, and their ideas are funneled through my experimentations on piano and saxophone as I was composing.
Were there moments of revelation when someone said, "Oh, that's my thing"?
No, it was awesome. And in fact, I didn't even know if I should like bring up that aspect of the compositional process at all in the press release or anything like that. But then, we did. But during the rehearsals and during the recording sessions and during the gigs to prep for the recording session, there was no recognition of anything like that. And I think that was the point too. I didn't want anything to be a direct copy, because when AI does that, when my jazz history students write a bunch of AI crap and feed it into the chat GPT or whatever, like you can tell right away when AI has done it. So that paper gets a complete F right away, right? So I didn't want my compositions to get a complete F. Depending on who's listening, there might be some Fs, but hopefully not a complete F.
With this music, I mean, you speak a bit as there being a lot of written material and, a lot of improvisation. Were you surprised with, what you ended up with after the recording session or sessions?
Yeah. So the compositions they're lengthy. It's 5 really long compositions with a lot of different sections, and that's on purpose. And for each rehearsal, each gig we did, and each take we did in the studio, those 5 songs go completely different directions. So actually part of what took so long for the record to come out was I had to comb through all the takes that we did in the studio and choose which direction I wanted song number 4 and song number 3 to which representation of those songs I wanted. I mean, in an ideal world, we'd be able to tour this 10-piece band and play a lot of gigs and see all the different directions that these 5 compositions can go. But as we all know, it's not quite that time period for improvisational based music these days.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and then one of the other aspects of it is not only you're collaborating with an electroacoustic musician, but I also read that after the fact, you took your own playing your solos from the date into the laboratory, and that must have been a time-consuming experience. Maybe talk about that. And also, I got the vibe that maybe this is the first time that you've done that on a recording.
Yeah. So I've been messing with pedals, with like effects pedals and stuff for a few years now. I've wanted to do it for like almost my entire career, but studying jazz and trying to shore up so some of that language prevented me from doing it, but also being afraid of it, being intimidated by it because there's such a great history of it. But the last few years, I moved to Chicago in 2021 during the pandemic, and the last few years being here, I was like, well, if now's the time to put the pedal to the metal, I guess, in certain ways, and try to just spend some time and really dedicate myself and focus on this aspect of it, because it's going to enrich other areas of my playing and composition as well. So I've been messing with it seriously the last few years, and I felt like this was the perfect album or representation to take some of my solos and some vocal things and start messing around and see how I can integrate it into the album. There's only 2 of the songs where I do it, but Miles and Wendy on the guitar stuff and Matt Mitchell on his Prophet 6, it sounds like it's throughout the entire record. But the stuff that I do on my saxophone, there's only two tracks, but the entire record overall has this electroacoustic thing, and which is part of the reason why I thought it was a perfect opportunity for me to try it. But yeah, you're right. You're totally right. It took me a really long time to decide which aspects of stuff that I put together in the post-production phase to actually make the record. So, and hopefully I'll keep doing it, and hopefully it'll get easier and easier as it goes along. But we're really happy with how it came out. And, it was definitely hundreds of hours for me after the record was made.
Right. I just wanted to touch back. You said you moved to Chicago in 21. Are you originally from Chicago?
Yeah. I grew up in Chicago and did my undergrad at DePaul University in Chicago. But then around 2000, when I was finishing up at DePaul, Dick Oates came, and he was a guest artist with a big band, and spent a couple of days with the small groups and improv classes and everything like that. And he just, I had already been studying Thad Jones, Mel Lewis, big band music, and I was aware of his playing, but he really blew me away. His sound, his style, his whole aura and attitude and philosophy on everything. And so the next year after I finished DePaul, I was like, I'm not going to school anymore. I want to just play. And I was playing in Chicago. And that whole year I was like, if I'm playing full time and I'm doing this musician thing, like for real, and where is Dick Oates teaching these days? I want to figure out, I want to study with him for a couple of years. And I went online, and he was teaching at the Manhattan School of Music at the time. And so I applied and got it and moved to New York. I moved to New York about a week before September 11th. And then I left New York during the pandemic. So my almost 20 years in New York was sandwiched by complete disasters. I don't know what that says, but here we are.
Wow. Okay. And, from, I know a lot of people in Chicago. I mean, super vibrant scene there right now, like a lot of creative music happening. Are you finding a lot of outlets there, or are you traveling a lot? It looked like you came back to New York to record this, and, I'm sure that's still part of your life, but, where are you plying your wares?
Yeah, I've been really lucky. I still have a lot of friends and contacts in New York, and I'm still back there semi-regularly, and I'm still touring with the quartet that I tour with is the bassist for Server Farm. It's Matt Mitchell and Chris Lightcap and Dan Weiss. And so we've done a bunch of tours. I've got a couple albums in the can already that I'm just trying to save up enough money to put out with those guys. So I'm still playing with New York musicians, but I am finding a lot of great musicians here in Chicago. I've got a quartet that I co-lead with Russ Johnson, the great trumpet player who used to live in New York as well. And we have a quartet with Clark Summers on bass and Dana Hall on drums, who are just 2 fantastic musicians that live here.
All 3 of those cats are killing.
Yeah, and sure. So we've got a record of all my music coming out in August. And so, I'm trying to, I have a duo record with a great Chicago percussionist named Tim Daisy, where I do a lot of this pedal stuff on tenor sax and clarinet. And I don't play clarinet very often on records. So, I'm trying to challenge myself compositionally, but also improvisationally, and try to be involved in a bunch of different groups and try to just keep creativity going these days, no matter where I'm living or who I'm playing with, because the world needs it. That's for sure.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed, I listen to the record and do a lot of driving, and I listen to it twice in the car and then once at home. And the nuance of everything, I was missing a lot in the car. So there's times we had talked about, the playing, the compositions, and then the conceptual here. When you were writing this music, did you have a clear idea of, where it's going to go? Because I mean, sometimes it's almost like you're overhead of this conversation with, about 18 different things, different layers, and not like stratified, but kind of like crossing through, piercing, and it's kind of jarring. I mean, in very cool way. But then there's times like I think in the third piece, there's just like kind of flat out boogaloo, and you're like blowing over the thing. And was this pieced together, or was this like initially what was going on?
Yeah, there was a lot of post-production on my end, but it wasn't so much like, well, I'm going to take this keyboard part and overlay it over here just to create a bunch of other layers. Those things, that aspect of it was really happening in real time for the most part. And, I think compositionally that was on purpose. And I do love a good cacophony on a lot of my records. And I that's just part of the sound that I love about creative music. If you go back to early New Orleans music, the group improvisational thing was an integral part of it. And so I think being from Chicago and being heavily influenced by the AACM and musicians that come out of that kind of thinking, but also loving straight ahead jazz, like I love having really like laid out, on Graceful Exit, there's really laid out orchestrational harmonies and melodies and contrapuntal things that are going on. But at the same time, I've got both guitars, the electric bass, and the keyboards improvising. So there's this double thing. There's like a magic eye thing going, which as a child of the 90s, I love the magic eye stuff. So that's a part of my music that I like. I understand that some people like their music more pure than that, and that's awesome. But for me, I can go back and listen to the records repeatedly because I'm hearing different things each time. And for me, that's an exciting thing when I find that on other people's records as well.
In the notes for the record, you speak about the promise and threat of AI, and as just as a human being living in the United States in 2025 and as a musician, how does that impact you? What are you thinking? What are you thinking might happen, and what concerns you? And also, like, what could be the possible, blessing of something that is this powerful if used correctly?
Yeah, obviously AI can be used for good. Like the idea behind some supercomputers and server farms of supercomputers, like being able to map the stars way faster than any humans could. Like the idea that the power of it is mind blowing and actually amazing. But like I said, human's gonna human, and like if there's basically server farms of people who are basically modern day slaves who are having to robo-call us and spam us with texts nonstop. Like when that kind of thing becomes a server farm and that kind of power and technology gets used, and you've got maybe bots that are just destroying your social media with misinformation at light speed that we can't even comprehend, that's only gonna be to the detriment of us as a human race or as a civilization. And we can't overstate how much damage it could possibly do. And as a musician that loves creativity and innovation and celebrates humanity and our art forms, I don't necessarily have the answers, but I think that as part of a society, it is partially my responsibility to at least raise the question to people who might not think of it otherwise. And hopefully, if we can get a server farm of people who care about humanity and creativity within the arts enough, maybe we can find some sort of common ground to create some sort of legislation or oversight to make sure that this immense power that's imminent or even amongst us already doesn't run out of hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd never thought about a group of people functioning as a server farm, but makes sense for sure. Do you ever see yourself actually using AI? You spoke about like your students' papers come to you as garbage and they're thrown out. Do you ever see like a positive use on your end? I mean, obviously it's being done all the time with, I'm told that Spotify is just, full of AI generated music. Do you see like a positive? Have you thought about this, how you might incorporate this actually into a future project?
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be a way. It's just a new, when synthesizers and keyboards came around, some people were completely appalled by it. But then you've got like Joe Zawinul, who just completely innovated, and all the entire Weather Report discography is gold to me, in a large part because Joe was willing to experiment with that stuff, and he used his musicality and merged it with the electronic aspect to create something that had never been made before. So I know that there's a way to do it. I'm gonna try, but I have problems even like turning on my computer correctly without something going wrong or something getting hung up. So I might not be the best representative of that, but I'm gonna try. There's no reason to completely just like cut it off prematurely, at least. But after a bunch of experimentation, if I decide that it's acoustic music for me all the way, then I'm gonna at least be able to do that knowing that I went through the process.
Mm-hmm. Also, you are represented on this record as poet. Maybe speak about that. I didn't, in listening to the track a couple times without knowing anything about it, I didn't really, you explain what that's about. So maybe for the listener, do that. And you talk about during the pandemic having gone to the Badlands, from what I'm guessing.
So when New York shut, I was living in Brooklyn, and in March 2020, like March 14th or whatever day that was, when New York declared that it was going to shut down, my wife and I had a 1.5-year-old at the time, and we went up the street. We went to the bodega, and we went to get a roll of 6 toilet pack of toilet paper, a roll of paper towels, and a gallon of milk, and it was like $40 or something. And my wife is like, man, if we're gonna get price gouged throughout whatever this virus, however many weeks this virus thing takes, let's get out of here. Let's go to her parents were living in Western South Dakota at the time, and she's like, let's go out there. There's plenty of room. There's way less people. Maybe the kid can still run around in parks for a while, and we could just be out here for like a couple weeks and ride this thing out. So we're like, okay, cool. So we brought like 6 outfits with us and went out to South Dakota. We wound up being out there for 9 months, because we all know how it turned out. But yeah, we wound up being out there for 9 months. And part of, it was definitely a culture shock thing, but it was great. There were definitely some advantages. Yeah, like South Dakota didn't have to shut down because it was very sparsely populated anyways. But one of the great things was I found a canyon about 5 minutes drive from the place we were staying. And I practiced in this canyon during the day for about 4 or 5 hours for maybe 6 or 7 months every day. And it was incredible. It was life-changing. It was like one of the few positives of the pandemic for me as a person, as an artist. I got to chill out. I got to think about things. I got to work on stuff musically that you don't necessarily get to when you're in the rigmarole of prepping for a tour or a recording session or learning other people's music. So it was really great. So during that time, I also realized it was like, okay, so what am I like shying away from, like musically and on records? Part of it is was this effects pedal stuff. So I started like really gathering information and going for effects pedal and experimenting with those things. And the other thing was like, people like Oliver Lake, I love his poetry on his records and everything like that. And there's a history of like musicians, instrumentalists incorporating poetry into their albums and into their music. So this was like an initial toe dip into that. I'm not a poet by any means, but I think part of it is overcoming just even that initial step of being like, oh, I could never do that. I could never make myself do that. It's so embarrassing. And ultimately, maybe on my deathbed, I'll be like, man, look, if I never did it, I'd be like, what was I so afraid of? Who cares? And so it's, it's kind of, it ties, I felt this was the perfect time and perfect album to incorporate it, because like, we're going to have to be courageous with our humanity and our vulnerabilities in order to face this threat, because this is like the biggest existential threat we're going to have to face as far as I can tell. So part of me facing my fears is allowing my basic poetry to be on there and trying to find a way to uplift it through the great musicianship of these people I was able to hire.
Mm-hmm. Did you, like knowing the hours, the years that it took you to arrive at the your ability to express yourself as a musician, was there any kind of like kind of imposter kind of vibe, like, like, why am I doing this? What, like the transparency involved in doing something that, you talk about the bravery in doing that. Maybe did you get like some feedback? Did you like do any kind of prep work to do this, or did it just like, okay, this is what I saw, this is what I'm thinking, here you go?
Yeah, no, I kind of, as far as straight up for the poetry thing, or the, the lyrics or the words or whatever, I didn't even ask for any help. I just kind of like, I did the initial thing. I tried to fix it up and make it less bad sounding. And at a certain point, I'm like, this is what it is. I'm like, this is my first foray into the thing. And I get the idea gets across, and I'm sure I can be more poetic about it. And there's definitely imposter syndrome. And I think for me to get over that, I'm going to need to do this exact same kind of study with the greats of poetry as I did on as I have been and continue to do on saxophone, because I still feel that on saxophone sometimes, but it's really about being an artist and getting your voice out there is really more about being courageous and saying, this is where I am. This is a snapshot of where I am at a particular time, and not being so precious about waiting for the perfect opportunity, because that perfect opportunity will never come. I have students who have graduated from college and they're not doing anything. They're not trying to get gigs, and they're not being part of the scene. And I'm like, well, what's going on? Like it's time for you to get out there, and you have to get the experience. And inevitably, most of them are like, well, I'm not ready yet. And it's like, you'll never be ready. What does ready mean? And so mulling that kind of stuff over, and plus I was doing a ton of Zoom lessons during the pandemic too. And it's like, and I'm hearing these similar types of things. And it was at the same time, I'm like, my poetry or writing or lyrics or whatever, or words or whatever I'm going to call it, will never be ready, especially since I never came to music or expression through that thing. In fact, I picked saxophone specifically to avoid words and the voice and stuff. And so it's just taken me 20, 30 years to come back around to it. So it's just by being less afraid and just moving forward with what you've got.
Can I assume there are more words, more lyrics, more poetry in your future?
Yeah. It ebbs and flows.
Right.
And sometimes I'm very much into bass saxophone these days. I have a thing that I'm writing for bass sax for quintet with Matt Mitchell and Chris Lightcap and Dan Weiss, and we're going to have Nate Woolley on trumpet join us, and I have to write a whole suite of stuff for bass saxophone and trumpet. So a lot of long tones on bass saxophone these days, and that's preventing me from writing words. So that, there's not enough hours in the day, but I'm trying to stay interested in as many different art forms as possible, because it just enriches your life, and it'll hold off that AI takeover just a little bit longer.
Yeah, amen to that. Before I let you go, you spoke of having a couple projects in the can. Can you tell us about what those are? You mentioned your bass saxophone project. That's crazy, man. Maybe just unpack a little bit what's your future, the rest of this year look like for you.
Yeah, the bass sax thing, it's 2025 is the year of bass saxophone for me, because in addition to doing that, I want to like write some straight ahead jazz tunes for bass sax quartet, right? Like for bass sax and rhythm section, because I just feel like that hasn't been done very much. I'm thinking about recording like an album of standards on it, just to challenge myself to make these albums, like in my mind, like just have not really been made because people aren't crazy enough to do them. So I guess I'm the crazy person. But also, I'm trying to do a solo saxophone record on every size saxophone. And so I'm currently trying to figure out what my bass saxophone solo record's going to be. I've already done like a sopranino one and a mezzo soprano and a soprillo saxophone solo records and a tenor one. So I thought of it because I did a tenor saxophone solo, all Charlie Parker song album when I was in that canyon in South Dakota. So like the last couple of weeks when I knew I was going to be moving to Chicago out of South Dakota, I was like, man, I've spent so much time here in the Canyon. Like I should find a way to document it somehow. And it was Charlie Parker's centennial, I think that year or the next year. And I'd been practicing Charlie Parker heads and forms just for, try to solidify the sound that I wanted to get and the time feel and everything. I'm like, man, I should bring my mobile rig out here and record Charlie Parker tunes out here in the Canyon. So I've got 4 solo sax records, and I'm trying to do one on every size. And so I'm messing with the bass saxophone one. So that's going to come out this year. I did a duo bass saxophone record with a great baritone and bass saxophonist in New Orleans named Dan Ostriker. And that's going to be coming out at some point, where we free improv 2 bass saxophones. So that's a weird sound that I'd never heard before. And like I said earlier, I've got this quartet with Russ Johnson and Clark Summers and Dana Hall, which is like my love poem to Chicago in a way. That's coming out in August, I think, hopefully. And then we're going to record this quintet record with Nate Woolley and Matt Mitchell and Chris Lightcap and Dan Weiss in November.
Excellent. Looking forward to checking all that out. Jon, thank you for your time and congratulations on this record. Wish you the best of success with it, man.
Thanks, David. Thanks for the time and the years.
Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Van Doren Reeds and Mouthpieces. Be sure and check out the Van Doren Advisory Studio in New York City for all your sound sculpting needs. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Arlen's Good Beer in Bowling Green, Ohio.
Engineered by Marco Mendoza. Visit his website at engineeredbymarco.com. The theme music is Hide, Seek, Find from my record Beatitude, out on Tiger Turn.
Produced by David Bixler. Be sure and subscribe to Liner Notes wherever you find your podcasts. If you like what you hear, I ask that you consider supporting Liner Notes financially. You can do this by going to the Liner Notes tab at davidbixler.com. Thank you for your consideration.